A crack formed across the fabric of reality, silent, impossible, and glowing with power no world was prepared to understand. It wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense. No sound carried through the vacuum of space. But every sensor array within 3 sectors of Deep Space Nine registered the same impossible data. Subspace was screaming. The tear manifested 17,000 kilometers from the station, a wound in the universe itself. Emerald and gold energy spiraled outward in defiance of known physics, creating gravitational eddies that shouldn't exist, and electromagnetic pulses that registered on frequencies Federation science had never documented. The anomaly pulsed like a heartbeat, each rhythm sending shockwaves through the quantum foam of space-time. Inside the maelstrom, Dr. Stephen Strange fought for consciousness. He tumbled through the dimensional breach, his cloak of levitation whipping frantically as it struggled to orient him. The familiar sensation of controlled dimensional travel had vanished the moment the spell went catastrophically wrong. He'd been sealing a breach in the Sanctum Sanctorum, a routine dimensional rupture near the dark dimension's border, when something other had intersected his magic. Not another mystical force. Something technological. Something that shouldn't have been able to interact with the mystic arts at all. The collision had been instantaneous and total. Now, Strange plunged through a tunnel of collapsing realities, each layer peeling away to reveal something fundamentally different beneath. The ambient magical energy he relied on grew thinner, replaced by something structured and mathematical. The very constants of physics were shifting around him. His enchantments flickered and sparked, trying to adapt to universal laws they'd never been designed to interpret. Then the breach spat him out. Strange materialized in open space, his arrival marked by a final pulse of emerald energy that rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. The cloak snapped taut, immediately supporting him as his boots found purchase on nothing. He gasped, purely reflexive. The shield spell around his head maintained breathable air, and his hand instinctively moved through defensive patterns. But no attack came. Strange floated in the silence of space, his mystical senses reeling. Everything felt wrong. The dimensional anchors he used to orient himself across realities were gone. The ambient magical energy that permeated the multiverse, the background radiation of mystical force that even mundane universes possessed, was nearly absent. This reality felt stripped down, sterile, governed by rules so rigid and mathematical that magic itself seemed like an intrusion. Where, he breathed, turning slowly. Stars surrounded him, but they were wrong. Not in their positions. He didn't recognize any constellations, which was expected in a dimensional jump, but in how they felt. There was no mystical resonance, no threads of fate connecting them, no echoes of cosmic entities that usually permeated space itself. This universe felt fundamentally materialistic in a way he'd never encountered. Then his eyes found the station. It hung against the cosmos like a mechanical flower, all angles and curves and purpose. The central core rose like a tower, surrounded by docking pylons that extended like petals. Lights gleamed across its surface, artificial, technological, but with an elegance that suggested advanced civilization. Ships of various sizes moved around it with clear purpose and coordination. Strange's mind raced. Advanced spacefaring civilization, post-warp capability based on the ship designs. The architecture suggested federation or alliance rather than empire. But there was something else, a complete absence of mystical infrastructure. No ley lines, no dimensional nodes, no reality anchors. This civilization had achieved all of this through pure technology. His mystical senses suddenly flared with warning. Something was watching him. Multiple somethings. He could feel sensor beams washing over him like invisible searchlights, probing and analyzing. The technology was sophisticated enough that it was interacting with his shield spells, creating feedback loops his magic had never encountered. Strange raised his hands, rings glowing as he prepared to. "Unidentified individual." A voice suddenly spoke directly into a shield spell, somehow transmitted through the energy field itself. "You are in violation of Federation space protocols. Remain stationary. A security team is en route to your position." Strange blinked. The voice was calm, professional, and spoke English, or his translation spells were working overtime. Federation. The term suggested exactly what he'd suspected, a multi-world alliance. But security team? He'd just survived a catastrophic dimensional breach. The last thing he needed was to be treated as a criminal. Behind him, space rippled. Strange spun, hands blazing with eldritch energy. A ship materialized from thin air. No, not thin air. He could sense the technology now, a form of localized quantum manipulation that bent light around the vessel. Cloaking technology. The ship was sleek and predatory, smaller than the station's docked vessels, but radiating purpose. Angular wings swept back from a cigar-shaped hull that bore markings he couldn't decipher. A beam of light shot from the ship. Strange's hands moved in intricate patterns, weaving a shield of geometric golden light. The beam struck his barrier, and the sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced. The beam didn't carry heat or kinetic force. Instead, it tried to disassemble him at the molecular level. His shield held, but barely. The mystical energy struggling to interpret and counter technology that shouldn't have been able to threaten magic in the first place. "Transporter beam resisted," another voice crackled. "Impossible. Repeating at full power." Strange didn't give them the chance. His hand swept outward, and the mirror dimension exploded into existence around him. Reality fractured into crystalline shards, refracting and multiplying everything. The security ship suddenly faced 1,000 Doctor Stranges, each one casting spells that bent space into impossible geometries. Alarms shrieked across the vessel's bridge. But Strange wasn't attacking. He was learning. His mystical senses drank in every detail of the ship's technology, analyzing the energy signatures, the quantum fields, the subspace distortions that these people used as casually as he wielded the mystic arts. This universe operated on principles that made magic difficult, but not impossible. He just needed to adapt. "Stand down," he called out, his voice carrying across open channels through sheer mystical will. "I mean no harm. I'm not from your universe. There's been an accident, a dimensional breach. I need to speak with whoever's in charge before the situation escalates." Silence answered him. Then, from the direction of the station, Strange felt something massive shift through space. Another ship was coming. This one was different, larger, more powerful, and it carried something he hadn't felt since arriving: actual authority. The cavalry had arrived. Now Strange just had to hope diplomacy worked better in this universe than it often did in his own. If you want to see more universe crossovers, hit subscribe and comment which character or world you want to see collide next. The USS Enterprise dropped out of warp with the kind of precision that spoke to decades of Starfleet engineering excellence. The Sovereign-class starship materialized 300 kilometers from Strange's position, its saucer section gleaming under the light of distant stars. Compared to the security vessels still maintaining a cautious distance, the Enterprise was a Leviathan, 642 meters of cutting-edge Federation technology, bristling with phaser arrays and torpedo launchers. On the bridge, Captain Jean-Luc Picard studied the view screen with the careful attention he reserved for genuinely unprecedented situations. "Report," he commanded. his voice carrying the weight of command earned through decades of exploration and first contact scenarios. Commander Data's fingers moved across his console with inhuman speed. The individual remained stationary within what appears to be a self-generated energy field, Captain. Our sensors detect no conventional technology, no power source, no circuitry, no recognizable energy signature. Yet he is sustaining a breathable atmosphere and gravitational orientation in open space, through means that violate the second law of thermodynamics. Violate? Picard's eyebrow arched. The energy expenditure should be considerable, yet we detect no corresponding power drain or entropy increase. It is as if he is drawing energy from nowhere. Data paused, his positronic brain processing impossible data. Captain, I cannot explain what I am observing using any known scientific framework. Counselor Deanna Troi leaned forward, her empathic senses focused on the strange figure floating in space. Captain, I sense confusion, caution, but also profound knowledge and power. There's something else, a depth to his mind I've never encountered. It's like sensing an ocean when I'm used to reading ponds. Is he a threat? Picard asked. I don't believe so, but he's certainly capable of being one. Lieutenant Commander Worf's hands hovered over tactical controls, his Klingon instincts screaming that this situation required aggression or retreat, not diplomatic curiosity. Captain, the security vessel reports their transporter beam was blocked by an unknown force field. Recommend we raise shields and arm weapons. Belay that, Mr. Worf. Picard stood, tugging his uniform jacket straight in the gesture his crew knew meant he was about to do something diplomatic and possibly dangerous. If this individual wanted to attack, he would have done so already. Commander Data, open a channel. Channel open, sir. Picard stepped toward the view screen. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You claim to be from another universe. While that concept challenges our understanding of reality, your arrival has caused significant disruptions to subspace in 3 sectors. We've detected spatial anomalies, quantum fluctuations, and gravitational distortions that pose a threat to navigation in planetary systems. I need to understand what happened and how we can resolve this situation. Strange studied the ship before him. Even without mystical senses, he could tell this vessel represented the pinnacle of this civilization's achievement. The captain's voice carried intelligence and genuine curiosity rather than fear or hostility. In his experience, those qualities were rare enough to be valuable. Captain Picard, Strange replied, allowing the mirror dimension to collapse around him. The crystalline reflections shattered and faded, leaving him floating alone again. My name is Dr. Stephen Strange. I'm the sorcerer supreme of my reality, essentially a guardian against mystical and dimensional threats. I was sealing a breach in my universe when something in your universe intersected my spell. The collision created a cascade failure that threw me here. On the Enterprise bridge, the crew exchanged glances that ranged from skeptical to fascinated. Sorcerer, Worf growled. Captain, this is obviously some form of deception or magic, Data interrupted, his eyes widening fractionally. The closest his android features came to shock. Captain, he is claiming to use magic. Magic doesn't exist, Chief Engineer Geordi LaForge stated from his engineering station, adjusting his visor as if that might help him make sense of the readings. It's just sufficiently advanced science we don't understand yet. Clark's third law. Strange allowed himself a slight smile. In my universe, we have a similar saying. Sufficiently analyzed magic is indistinguishable from science. But let me demonstrate something your sensors should find interesting. He raised his hands, and the space around him erupted with golden light. Geometric patterns expanded outward, mandalas and sigils that rotated through dimensions the Federation scientists didn't have names for. The cloak of levitation billowed dramatically, and Strange conjured an intricate spell form that hung in space like a three-dimensional equation written in pure energy. Every sensor on the Enterprise went haywire. "Impossible," Geordi breathed, his visor feeding him data that contradicted everything he knew about physics. "The energy isn't coming from anywhere. It's being created from quantum probability fluctuations, but the efficiency is... There's no entropy loss. None. That can't happen." Data's fingers became a blur. "Fascinating. The energy pattern is recursive and self-sustaining. It appears to be manipulating space-time at the quantum level, but through a mechanism that our sensors cannot identify. Captain, this is genuinely unprecedented." Picard felt a familiar tingle of excitement that came with genuine first contact. Not with a new species or civilization, but with an entirely new understanding of how the universe could work. "Dr. Strange, would you be willing to come aboard? We have much to discuss, and I suspect our science teams would benefit greatly from understanding how you accomplish what you do. In return, perhaps we can help you understand why your arrival has destabilized our local space, and how to reverse the damage." Strange considered carefully. In his experience, offers of cooperation from official authorities were rarely as simple as they appeared, but this Captain Picard seemed genuine. And Strange desperately needed information about this universe if he was going to repair the dimensional breach and find his way home. "I accept," Strange said, "though I should warn you, your transporter technology might not interact well with my protective enchantments." "We can beam you directly to a reinforced cargo bay," Picard offered, "with shields in place to contain any unexpected interactions." "That would be wise." Picard nodded to his transporter chief. "Energize." The transporter beam locked onto Strange, and for the second time in an hour, the fabric of his reality bent in ways it wasn't designed to handle. The sensation was distinctly unpleasant, his molecules being disassembled and reassembled while his magical shields fought the process every step of the way. When Strange rematerialized in the cargo bay, he was immediately surrounded by a shimmering force field. Security officers stood at strategic positions, phasers drawn but not aimed. Beyond the field, Captain Picard waited with several of his senior staff. "Welcome aboard the Enterprise, Dr. Strange," Picard said. "Now, shall we discuss how you've managed to make magic and science equally confused?" The Borg cube drifted through the Necrit expanse, a perfect obsidian monolith against the cosmic void. 28 cubic kilometers of assimilated technology, housing thousands of drones and the collective consciousness of trillions. It moved with inexorable purpose through space, its sensors constantly scanning for civilizations to absorb, technology to acquire, biological distinctiveness to add to their own. Then, for the first time in 17 cycles, the collective paused. A signal had reached them, faint, impossible, and utterly irresistible. It originated from Federation space, 3 sectors distant, but its nature transcended conventional spatial limitations. The energy signature didn't match any known technology in the Borg's vast database spanning thousands of assimilated species. More significantly, it shouldn't exist at all within the understood parameters of physics. Deep within the cube's central plexus, the Borg Queen's consciousness stirred. "Spatial anomaly detected," the collective voice echoed through 1,000 drone minds simultaneously. "Energy source, unknown. Technology classification, unprecedented. Biological origin, singular humanoid. Assessment, perfection previously unencountered." The Queen's actual form resided in the cube's core, her pale features illuminated by the green glow of Borg technology. Her eyes, more human than any other part of her, focused on the data streaming through her consciousness. What she perceived defied the Borg's fundamental understanding of how the universe operated. Energy from nothing. Matter manipulation without technological interface. Dimensional barriers crossed without quantum tunneling or warp field generation. The individual responsible possessed capabilities that suggested an entirely new category of assimilation potential. Magic, she whispered, the word tasting foreign on mechanical vocal cords. The Borg had encountered species with psionic abilities, Q with reality warping powers, beings of pure energy. But this was different. This was systematic, repeatable, teachable. It was technology by another name, and the Borg assimilated technology. "Set course for Deep Space Nine," the Queen commanded. "Maximum velocity. All drones to combat readiness. Prepare assimilation chambers. Tactical priority. Acquire the individual designated Dr. Strange, intact." The cube altered course, its transwarp conduit opening like a wound in space. Within seconds, the monolithic vessel vanished, reappearing light years closer to its target with each dimensional jump. Aboard the Enterprise, Strange stood in the science lab, surrounded by equipment he didn't fully understand, while Federation officers studied him like he was an exotic specimen, which he supposed he was. Data sat at a console, his fingers moving with mechanical precision as he analyzed the mystical energy Strange had carefully released for study. Fascinating. The energy appears to exist in a quantum superposition until observed, at which point it collapses into whatever form Dr. Strange intends. The act of will itself serves as the collapse mechanism. That's actually not a bad explanation, Strange admitted, impressed despite himself. Though it's more complex than that. The energy comes from other dimensions, places where the laws of physics are more flexible. I'm essentially borrowing power and reshaping it according to mystical principles that predate science as you understand it. Geordi LaForge shook his head, his visor feeding him data that made his engineering degree feel inadequate. But that would require accessing parallel dimensions simultaneously, maintaining stable dimensional portals, and converting extra-dimensional energy into forms compatible with our physics. The computational power alone would require no computation, Strange interrupted. That's the difference between magic and your technology. I don't calculate the quantum equations. I know them intuitively, almost instinctively. Centuries of training teach sorcerers to perceive and manipulate reality directly, without technological intermediaries. Picard watched the exchange with the careful attention of someone witnessing history. "Dr. Strange, you mentioned your arrival caused cascade failure. Could you elaborate?" Strange's expression darkened. "When my spell intersected with your subspace, I think you call it, the interaction created feedback loops. My magic tried to anchor itself using dimensional markers that don't exist in your universe. Your subspace tried to interpret mystical energy as some form of spatial anomaly. The result was catastrophic. I essentially punched a hole through the dimensional membrane, separating our realities." "Can it be repaired?" Picard asked. "Yes, but..." Red alert klaxons suddenly shrieked through the Enterprise. "Captain, to the bridge!" Worf's voice carried controlled urgency. "We have an emergency situation." Picard's command instincts kicked in immediately. "Mr. Data, with me. Dr. Strange, I'm afraid our conversation will have to wait." Strange's mystical senses flared with warning. Something massive had just entered the system, and it radiated a wrongness that made his skin crawl. "Captain, I'm coming with you. Whatever just arrived, it's not natural." Picard didn't argue. They moved quickly through the Enterprise's corridors, Strange's cloak billowing behind him as he kept pace with the Starfleet officers. The moment they reached the bridge, Strange understood why every instinct he possessed was screaming danger. The view screen displayed a nightmare rendered in geometric perfection. "Borg cube," Worf reported, his voice tight. "Distance, 3 million kilometers and closing." They dropped out of transwarp 30 seconds ago and are on direct intercept course. The Borg? Strange's mind raced through the brief tactical information he'd absorbed during his time aboard. Cybernetic Collective. Assimilation of technology and biology. Adaptation to weapons. They can't be here for you. You said Borg encounters are rare in this sector. Correct, Data confirmed, his android features grave. Captain, the cube altered course 17 minutes ago, precisely 3 minutes after Dr. Strange materialized in this universe. Statistical analysis suggests 99.7% probability they are responding to his arrival. Strange felt cold realization settle in his chest. They detected my magic. They think it's technology they can assimilate. Can they? Picard asked bluntly. I don't know. I've faced hive minds before, interdimensional parasites, demonic collectives, but nothing quite like this. If they can somehow assimilate mystical knowledge. Strange trailed off, imagining Borg drones wielding the power of the mystic arts. The image was apocalyptic. Troy's face had gone pale. Captain, I sense hunger. Overwhelming, absolute hunger. They want what he has more than anything they've ever encountered. The Borg cube accelerated, its massive form growing larger on the view screen. Incoming transmission, Worf announced. The screen flickered, and the Borg Queen's face appeared. Her pale features held an expression that might have been anticipation or hunger or both. We are the Borg, the collective voice announced. Dr. Stephen Strange, you possess technology we require. Your biological and mystical distinctiveness will be added to our own. Resistance is futile. Strange stepped forward, his hands already glowing with defensive magic. You have no idea what you're asking for. Magic isn't technology. It can't be assimilated or programmed or irrelevant. The Queen interrupted. All forms of power can be adapted. All knowledge can be absorbed. You will be assimilated. Your magic will become ours. The collective will achieve perfection through mystical integration. The transmission cut. Picard turned to his crew, his voice carrying absolute command authority. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Helm, evasive pattern Delta 5. Tactical, prepare quantum torpedoes. Geordi, I need every bit of power you can give me. Captain, Strange said quietly, mystical energy already crackling around his hands. If they adapt to phasers and torpedoes, I might be your only weapon that can hurt them. But I need to understand. What happens if the Borg actually succeed in assimilating magical knowledge? Picard met Strange's eyes, and the Sorcerer Supreme saw genuine fear there for the first time. Then God help us all, Picard said. Because nothing in this galaxy would be able to stop them. The Borg cube opened fire. The first Borg cutting beam sliced through space like emerald lightning, striking the Enterprise's shields with enough force to rock the entire ship. Sparks erupted from bridge consoles as power relays overloaded. The Sovereign-class starship's shields flared brilliant blue, absorbing the impact but buckling under the sheer concentrated energy. Shields at 82%, Worf barked, his hands flying across tactical controls. Returning fire. Quantum torpedoes streaked from the Enterprise's launchers, blue-white spheres of destructive energy that crossed the distance in seconds. They impacted the Borg cube's surface in brilliant explosions and accomplished precisely nothing. The cube's adaptive shielding analyzed the weapon signatures in microseconds, adjusting its defenses to render the torpedoes harmless. No effect, Worf growled in frustration. They've already adapted. Strange watched the exchange with growing concern. The Borg's adaptation speed was terrifying, faster than any enemy he'd faced. Even Thanos had required time to counter new attacks. These creatures learned instantly, sharing knowledge across their entire collective in real time. Evasive maneuvers, Picard commanded. Pattern Omega 3. The Enterprise banked hard, its impulse engines flaring as it dove beneath another cutting beam. But the Borg cube pivoted with surprising agility for something so massive, keeping the Federation starship in its firing arc. Another beam lanced out, this one striking the secondary hull. The shields held, but barely. "Shields at 61%, Data reported with android precision. "At current rate of fire, shield failure in 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Strange's hands moved through intricate patterns, golden light weaving between his fingers. "Captain, get me closer. I need to be within direct mystical range." "That's suicide," Worf objected. "The Borg will transport you directly onto their cube the moment our shields... Then I'll have to make sure they can't." Strange's eyes blazed with determination. The cloak of levitation spread wide, responding to his will. "Your shields protect against energy and matter. My shields protect against dimensional intrusion. Between both, we might survive long enough for me to do some damage." Picard made a command decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Helm, attack pattern Delta. Bring us within 50 kilometers of that cube. Mr. Worf, concentrate all phaser fire on a single point. I don't care if they adapt. I want that section of their hull glowing." The Enterprise surged forward, racing directly toward the Borg monolith. Phaser arrays lit up across the starship's hull, crimson beams converging on a single section of the cube's surface. The Borg shields adapted within seconds, but Picard wasn't trying to damage them. He was creating a distraction. Strange felt the distance close. At 50 kilometers, his mystical senses could finally perceive the true horror of the Borg Collective. Thousands of minds, all linked, all thinking as one. There was no individuality, no personal desire, just absolute purpose. And right now, that purpose was focused entirely on him. "Transporters locking on," Data warned. "They are attempting to beam Dr. Strange directly through our shields." Strange's hands snapped forward, and reality fractured. The mirror dimension exploded into existence around him, creating a recursive dimensional loop that made his exact position impossible to determine. The Borg transporter beam scattered across 1,000 different spatial coordinates, each one containing a reflection of Strange rather than the man himself. "Transporter beam disrupted," Data confirmed, fascination evident even through his measured tone. "The Borg cannot establish a lock." "Good," Strange said, his voice tight with concentration. "Now let's see how they adapt to something they've never encountered." He thrust both hands forward, and the very fabric of space obeyed his will. Eldritch whips materialized, not made of matter or energy in any conventional sense, but of pure mystical force that existed in dimensions the Borg ZTCC sensors couldn't detect. The golden tendrils lashed out across the void, bypassing the cube's shields entirely because they weren't traveling through normal space. They struck the Borg vessel's hull and sank in, burrowing through the adaptive armor like it wasn't there. Inside the cube, chaos erupted. Drones stumbled as mystical energy coursed through their systems, shorting out cybernetic implants that had no defense against extra-dimensional attack. Bulkheads warped as Strange's magic manipulated space itself, creating pockets of folded reality that crushed Borg technology like paper. The Collective's perfect coordination faltered as drones suddenly found themselves in spaces that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Borg Queen felt it, pain, for the first time in decades. True, inexplicable pain that her enhanced systems couldn't process or adapt to. "Analysis," she commanded the Collective. "Classify the attack mechanism." Data streams flooded her consciousness. Energy type, unknown. Delivery method, undetectable. Defense protocol, insufficient. The answer was unacceptable. The Borg adapted to everything. It was their singular advantage, their path to perfection. They would adapt to this as well. "Dispatch assault drones," the Queen ordered. "Physical assimilation. Eliminate defensive capabilities through direct contact." Sections of the cube's hull irised open, and dozens of Borg drones launched into space. They moved with mechanical precision, magnetic propulsion units carrying them toward the Enterprise in a swarm of cybernetic horror. "Incoming Borg boarding party," Worf announced. 37 drones. They're heading straight for us." Strange's eyes narrowed. The drones were moving through open space without ships or protective gear, their cybernetic enhancements allowing them to survive the vacuum. More concerning, his mystical senses detected something new in their programming. The Collective was already attempting to devise countermeasures to his magic. "They're adapting," Strange warned. "Learning from every spell I cast. Captain, I need to board that cube directly. I have to disrupt their adaptation protocols before they figure out how to shield against mystical attacks." "Absolutely not," Picard stated firmly. "We're not sending you into..." An explosion rocked the bridge as one of the Borg cutting beams found its mark. "Forward shields failing," Data reported. "Hull breach on Deck 12. Emergency force fields in place." Strange didn't wait for permission. The cloak of levitation surged, carrying him toward the view screen. His hands traced a circular pattern in the air, and a portal of golden light tore open. A stable gateway that connected the Enterprise bridge directly to open space. "What are you doing?" Picard demanded. "Something incredibly dangerous," Strange replied. He stepped toward the portal, then paused, looking back. "If I don't return in 10 minutes, run. Get as far from this sector as possible and warn the Federation. If the Borg successfully assimilate mystical knowledge, every reality in the multiverse becomes vulnerable." Before anyone could stop him, Strange stepped through the portal. He materialized in the void between the Enterprise and the Borg cube, floating among the swarm of approaching drones. They immediately altered course, converging on him with single-minded purpose. Assimilation tubules extended from their arms, nanoprobes designed to rewrite biology at the cellular level. Strange's hands blazed with golden fire. "Come on then," he growled, power crackling around him like a storm. "Let's see what happens when the Borg try to assimilate magic itself." The drones attacked as one, and Strange met them with the full fury of the mystic arts. Eldritch constructs materialized. Shields, weapons, dimensional barriers. His hand moved in patterns that rewrote local physics, creating zones where the Borg's technology simply stopped functioning. Drones froze mid-flight, as time itself dilated around them. Others found themselves trapped in pocket dimensions, isolated from the Collective's guidance. But for every drone Strange disabled, the others learned. Their movements became more coordinated, more specific. They began anticipating his spell patterns, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. The Collective was adapting in real time, processing mystical combat data faster than Strange could develop new strategies. A tubule grazed Strange's shoulder, and he felt nanoprobes attempting to penetrate his shields. His defensive enchantments held, but barely. The Borg had already begun developing countermeasures to magic. This was going to be closer than he'd hoped. Strange carved through the drone swarm like a whirlwind of mystical fury, but the price was mounting. Each spell he cast fed more data to the Collective. Each defensive pattern taught them new ways to counter his magic. He could feel the Borg consciousness analyzing him with terrifying efficiency, dissecting his techniques the way Federation scientists might study a new particle. A drone lunged from his blind spot. Strange spun, the cloak of levitation catching the cybernetic horror and hurling it into 3 others. But the distraction cost him. Another drone closed the distance, its assimilation tubules punching through his outer shield layer. Pain exploded across Strange's left arm as nanoprobes invaded his bloodstream. He screamed, not from the physical agony, but from the sensation of something foreign attempting to rewrite his cellular structure. Millions of microscopic machines flooded into him, seeking to transform flesh into circuitry, to connect his mind to the collective's hive consciousness. But the nanoprobes encountered something they'd never faced before, a body saturated with mystical energy. Strange's magical defenses activated automatically, treating the Borg technology like an infection. Golden light blazed beneath his skin, and the nanoprobes began to malfunction. They couldn't assimilate energy that existed in dimensions their programming couldn't access. They tried to adapt, to rewrite themselves, but mystical force operated on principles that transcended machine logic. The nanoprobes died screaming. If machines could scream, their microscopic forms dissolving into harmless atoms. Strange gasped, pulling his arm away from the drone. Dark veins had spread from the injection point, but they were already fading as his body's mystical saturation purged the infection. The Borg drone stood frozen, its collective link stuttering as it tried to process what had just happened. Then Strange felt it, the collective's attention focusing on him like a searchlight. The Queen's consciousness reached out across the void, studying him with an intensity that felt like physical pressure against his mind. "Fascinating," the Queen's voice whispered directly into Strange's thoughts, bypassing conventional communication entirely. "You cannot be assimilated through conventional means. Your biology rejects our perfection, but your knowledge, that remains accessible." Strange's eyes widened in horror as he understood. The nanoprobes had failed to convert his body, but in those few seconds of contact, they'd transmitted something back to the collective. Data. Not complete mystical knowledge, but fragments. Impressions of spell structures, patterns of dimensional manipulation. Seeds of understanding that the Borg's vast computational power could analyze and potentially replicate. "No," Strange breathed. The remaining drones suddenly moved differently. Their coordination shifted from mechanical precision to something more fluid, almost instinctive. One raised its arm, and Strange felt reality ripple around it. The drone was attempting to cast a spell, crude, malformed, but unmistakably magical. It failed. The energy dissipated harmlessly, but the attempt itself was apocalyptic in its implications. The Borg were learning magic. Strange didn't hesitate. He thrust both hands forward and tore open a dimensional gateway directly beneath himself. The portal swallowed him whole, transporting him instantly across the remaining distance to the Borg cube's hull. He materialized against the dark surface, his hands already moving through the complex gestures required for what he was about to attempt. "Enterprise, if you can hear me," Strange called out, trusting his mystical voice projection to reach Picard's ship. "I'm going inside. If this goes wrong, if the Borg somehow succeed in integrating magic into their collective, we'll find a way to stop them," Picard's voice responded, transmitted through subspace. "Whatever it takes, Dr. Strange. Godspeed." Strange placed both palms flat against the cube's surface. His rings flared with power, and golden light spread across the Borg hull like veins. He was forcing a connection, using the same principle as the Borg's own assimilation technique, but in reverse. Instead of them invading him, he would invade them. The cube's hull resisted. Adaptive armor tried to shift frequencies, to find a configuration that would repel mystical intrusion. But Strange poured more power into the spell, drawing energy from dimensions that had no connection to this universe, fueling his magic with the desperate knowledge that failure meant multiversal catastrophe. Reality bent. The hull gave way. Strange sank through solid matter like it was water, phasing directly into the Borg cube's interior through a dimensional shift that bypassed physical barriers entirely. He emerged into a nightmare of green-lit corridors and cybernetic horror. Borg drones moved with mechanical purpose, none immediately reacting to his presence. Alcoves lined the walls, each containing a dormant drone connected to the collective through networks of cables and technology that defied easy classification. Strange's mystical senses reeled from the overwhelming psychic pressure. Thousands of minds all thinking in perfect synchronization, all focused on a single purpose: assimilate the Sorcerer's Supreme's knowledge. He could feel the Queen's consciousness at the cube's heart, a focal point of terrible intelligence directing the collective's efforts. "Intruder detected!" The collective's voice echoed from every drone simultaneously. "Sector 7 Alpha! Dispatch assimilation units!" Dozens of drones detached from their alcoves, converging on Strange's position with frightening speed. He raised his hands, prepared to fight, when his mystical senses detected something that made his blood run cold. Deep in the cube's core, the Borg were constructing something new. Strange could perceive it through the dimensional barriers, a chamber being modified with technology that shouldn't exist. Crystalline structures that resembled quantum computers but operated on principles that suggested mystical architecture. The Borg were building a magical processing center, attempting to create technology that could replicate spell effects. They were closer to success than Strange had feared. A cutting beam lanced from the ceiling. Strange conjured a shield, the golden disk of energy absorbing the impact. But 3 more beams followed, forcing him to weave a complex web of protective barriers. The Borg were already adapting their tactics, using overlapping fire patterns that taxed his defensive capabilities. Strange ran. He sprinted through the corridor, the cloak of levitation billowing behind him as he dodged cutting beams and grasping drones. His hands moved constantly, casting spells that created obstacles, walls of force that blocked passages, dimensional pockets that swallowed pursuing drones, temporal distortions that slowed his enemies while he accelerated forward. But the collective learned from every spell. Drones began anticipating his movements, cutting off escape routes before he could reach them. The cube itself was becoming hostile. Bulkheads shifting to create dead ends, gravity fluctuating to throw off his balance. Strange skidded around a corner and found himself face to face with something that shouldn't exist. A Borg drone stood before him, but this one was different. Its cybernetic implants glowed with golden light instead of the usual green. Mystical energy crackled around its hands, chaotic and uncontrolled, but undeniably magical. The collective had succeeded in creating a hybrid. Technology and magic merged into a single horrifying entity. The hybrid drone raised its hand, and Strange felt reality begin to tear around him as it attempted to cast a spell. It was crude, unstable. The drone didn't understand what it was doing, merely replicating patterns without comprehension. But even crude magic wielded by the Borg Collective represented a threat of unimaginable proportions. Strange's decision crystallized in an instant. He couldn't just disable this cube. He couldn't just escape. He had to ensure the Borg never succeeded in replicating magical knowledge. He had to destroy every trace of mystical data the collective had acquired, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. Strange didn't give the hybrid drone a chance to complete its spell. His hand swept forward, and the mirror dimension erupted into existence with catastrophic force. Reality shattered like glass around the drone, trapping it in a recursive dimensional loop where cause and effect became meaningless. The creature's magical attempt collapsed inward, the unstable energy imploding harmlessly into dimensional fractures. But Strange felt the collective's attention sharpen. They'd witnessed his technique. They were learning. He had minutes at best before they adapted. Strange bolted deeper into the cube, his mystical senses guiding him toward the core. The Borg's architecture was labyrinthine, but dimensional perception allowed him to navigate in ways the collective couldn't predict. He phased through bulkheads, teleported across vast chambers, used the mirror dimension to skip entire sections of the cube. Behind him, the pursuit intensified. Hundreds of drones converged on his trail, moving with the terrifying coordination of a single organism. Cutting beams crisscrossed corridors he'd just left. Transporters tried to lock on to him, only to find his dimensional phasing made targeting impossible. Strange burst into a massive chamber and stopped dead. The Borg's central plexus stretched before him, a cathedral of technology and horror. Thousands of drones hung in alcoves that spiraled upward into darkness. Data streams visible as green light flowed through countless cables. And at the chamber's heart, suspended in a column of illuminated circuitry, was the Queen. Her pale face turned toward him, and Strange felt the full weight of the collective's consciousness focus like a laser. "Dr. Strange!" The Queen's voice echoed with the resonance of billions of assimilated minds. "You have come to us. How efficient." Drones dropped from their alcoves, surrounding Strange in a tightening circle. But he wasn't looking at them. His mystical senses were locked on the chamber's construction, specifically the crystalline structure growing around the Queen's platform. It pulsed with stolen magical energy, a twisted fusion of Borg technology and mystical architecture. They weren't just studying magic. They were building a framework to incorporate it into the collective itself. "You don't understand what you're doing," Strange said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd witnessed universes die. "Magic isn't technology. It's not something you can dissect and replicate. It requires balance, understanding, responsibility. In the wrong hands or the wrong hive mind, it becomes a weapon that destroys realities." "We are aware," the Queen replied. "We have accessed your memories through the nanoprobe contact. We perceive the dangers. We also perceive the possibilities. Magic integrated with our perfection would allow the collective to transcend physical limitations. We could assimilate dimensions themselves. All realities would achieve unity through us." Strange's blood ran cold. The Queen wasn't just talking about assimilating this universe. She was describing multiversal conquest, the Borg spreading across every dimension, every timeline, consuming all of existence into their perfect, unified consciousness. "That's not perfection," Strange said quietly. "That's extinction. Your perspective is limited by individuality. We will help you understand. You will be assimilated. Not physically. Your biology has proven resistant. But mentally, your knowledge will become ours. You will experience the peace of the collective, and we will experience the power of your mystic arts." The drones moved as one, closing in. Strange's hands blazed with defensive power, but he knew he couldn't fight thousands of Borg simultaneously. Even his most devastating spells would only delay the inevitable. The collective adapted too quickly, learned too fast. He needed a different strategy. "All right," Strange said, and the words surprised even himself. "You want my knowledge? You want to understand magic? Then let's make a deal." The Queen's expression shifted. Curiosity, perhaps, or the collective's equivalent of it. "Explain." "I'll give you access to mystical knowledge willingly. No resistance, no barriers. Complete transparency." Strange saw the drones pause, waiting for the trap they knew had to be coming. "In exchange, you transport me to your central processing node, the place where you store and analyze assimilated data." "I want to see how you process information," professional curiosity. You seek to sabotage us from within. Probably, Strange admitted with a slight smile. But you're going to analyze my knowledge anyway. This way, you get it faster, more completely. And who knows, maybe I'll actually learn something interesting about how the Borg think. If I'm about to become part of the collective, I might as well understand what I'm joining. The Queen studied him with an intensity that felt like surgical precision. Her vast computational power ran probability assessments, threat analyses, strategic projections. Strange could feel her consciousness probing the edges of his offer, searching for deception. Finally, she spoke. Acceptable. You will be transported to Primary Processing Chamber 7. You will interface with our systems voluntarily. Resistance at any point will result in immediate forced assimilation. Understood, Strange said. The transporter beam seized him before he could reconsider. Molecules scattered and reformed, and Strange materialized in a chamber that defied conventional geometry. Massive data cores rose like monoliths, their surfaces crawling with ever-shifting Borg symbols. Processing nodes hummed with the computational power of civilizations, and at the room's center stood an alcove designed for a single purpose: neural interface. Two drones approached, carrying what looked like a crown of circuitry and horror, a direct neural link to the collective's processing systems. Strange allowed them to place it on his head. The moment metal touched skin, agony exploded through his consciousness. It felt like his mind was being torn apart and examined. Every memory, every spell, every dimensional secret laid bare before the collective's infinite scrutiny. But Strange wasn't just being analyzed, he was analyzing them. Through the neural link, he perceived the Borg's data architecture, the vast network of information storage, the processing algorithms, the quantum computations that allowed billions of drones to think as one. And most importantly, he found what he was looking for: the isolated data segment containing mystical information. It was smaller than he'd feared. The collective had acquired fragments, impressions, but not comprehensive understanding. They were still in the early stages of decoding magic's fundamental principles. Strange could destroy it. Right now, while he had access. A carefully constructed feedback loop, a recursive spell embedded in their processing core, could corrupt the mystical data beyond recovery. But there was a problem. The feedback loop would also destroy him. The neural link was too deep, too integrated. Corrupting the Borg's mystical data while connected would mean corrupting his own mind simultaneously. He'd succeed in his mission, but he'd either die or be left brain dead. Through the Enterprise's communication systems, Strange heard Picard's voice, distant but clear. "Dr. Strange, whatever you're planning, we're detecting massive energy buildup in the cube. You need to extract now." Strange's hand tightened. The cloak of levitation stirred restlessly around his shoulders, sensing his intent. He thought of his universe, of Wong and the sanctums, of the Earth he'd sworn to protect. He thought of this universe too, of Picard and his crew, of the billions living under the Federation's banner. If the Borg successfully integrated magic, both universes, all universes, would burn. The choice was simple, really. Strange closed his eyes and began constructing the most complex spell of his life. The spell Strange constructed existed in layers that transcended conventional magical architecture. It was part curse, part virus, part dimensional bomb, a recursive algorithm written in mystical syntax that would corrupt every fragment of magical data the Borg had acquired. But it required precision that bordered on the impossible. One miscalculation would either fail to cleanse the collective systems or detonate with enough force to vaporize the entire cube. Strange's consciousness expanded through the neural link, perceiving the Borg's data architecture in ways the collective couldn't anticipate. They thought he was surrendering knowledge, Instead, he was mapping their weaknesses. The Queen sensed something wrong. "You are not complying." "Your neural patterns indicate I'm about to do something really stupid," Strange muttered. "Yeah, that tracks." Golden light exploded from the neural crown, racing through the collective systems like wildfire through dry brush. Strange's spell infiltrated every data core, every processing node, every quantum pathway the Borg used to store mystical information. The feedback was instantaneous and excruciating. His own consciousness caught in the backlash as corrupted data streams tore through his mind. Strange screamed. On the Enterprise bridge, every sensor array lit up with impossible readings. "Energy surge from inside the Borg cube," Data reported, his fingers racing across controls. "Readings are consistent with Dr. Strange's mystical signature, but amplified by several orders of magnitude. Captain, he's channeling enough power to destabilize the entire structure." Picard's jaw tightened. "Can we transport him out?" "Negative. The energy field is creating too much interference. We cannot establish a lock." "Then get us closer. Prepare to—" "Captain," Worf interrupted, his tactical display flashing urgent warnings. "Multiple warp signatures detected. Bearing 273 Mark V. Ships decloaking." The view screen split into multiple panels, each showing a different nightmare unfolding. 3 Romulan warbirds shimmered into existence, their predatory hulls gleaming emerald against the stars. 2 Cardassian Galore-class cruisers flanked them, weapons already charging. And behind them all, a vessel that made even the Enterprise's seasoned crew exchange worried glances. A Klingon Vorcha-class attack cruiser, its blood-red hull bearing the insignia of a house Picard recognized. "Chancellor Gowron's personal flagship," Worf breathed, surprise evident even through his controlled demeanor. "Captain Picard." A Romulan commander's face appeared on screen. Sharp features, calculating eyes, the bearing of someone who'd made treachery into an art form. "How convenient. The Federation has already located the dimensional anomaly for us. We'll be taking custody of Dr. Strange now. His abilities would serve the Star Empire far better than they serve you." A Cardassian gull's face replaced the Romulan's, cold, militaristic, scarred from decades of warfare. "The Cardassian Union has equal claim. The Stranger's technology could tip the balance of power in this quadrant. We cannot allow either the Federation or the Romulans to monopolize such an asset." Then Chancellor Gowron's face filled the screen, and even through the transmission, his warrior's intensity was palpable. "Fools, all of you!" The Klingon leader's eyes blazed with something between rage and excitement. "Can you not see what's happening? The Stranger battles the Borg alone, inside their cube. Such courage deserves honor, not your petty schemes to capture and exploit him." Picard stood, straightening his uniform with a gesture that meant he was about to engage in the kind of diplomacy that required surgical precision. "Chancellor, Commander, Gull, this situation is far more critical than any territorial dispute. Dr. Strange is attempting to prevent the Borg from assimilating mystical knowledge. If he fails, the Borg will gain capabilities that threaten every species in this quadrant. Federation, Romulan, Cardassian, Klingon. It won't matter. The Borg will adapt to magic itself, which is precisely why we must secure him," the Romulan commander countered smoothly. "If the Borg can assimilate such power, so can we. Willingly, intelligently, we could become the counterforce necessary to—" The Borg cube exploded, not with fire or conventional force, but with a cascade of dimensional fractures that tore through its structure like reality itself was rejecting the vessel's existence. Golden light erupted from the cube's core, racing along every corridor, every chamber, every alcove. Borg drones froze mid-motion as the mystical energy burned through their systems, corrupting the data they'd stolen. erasing every trace of magical knowledge the collective had acquired. Inside the cube, Strange felt his consciousness fragmenting. The feedback from the spell was worse than he'd calculated, not just corrupting Borg data, but threatening to shatter his own mind in the process. The neural link was too deep. He was too connected. As the spell destroyed the collective's mystical archives, it was simultaneously destroying the parts of his brain that processed magical information. He was winning, but the cost was everything he was. The cloak of levitation surged with desperate purpose. It wasn't sentient in the traditional sense, but it had protected Strange for years, developed something like loyalty or affection or both. Now it wrapped around him completely, forming a cocoon of crimson fabric that began pulling him away from the neural interface. The neural crown resisted, physical connections fighting against mystical force. For 3 agonizing seconds, Strange hung suspended between the Borg's grip and the cloak's desperate rescue attempt. Then the cloak tore him free. Strange flew backward, the neural connections snapping with a psychic backlash that felt like lightning through his skull. The cloak caught him, supporting his convulsing form as golden light continued to cascade through the cube's dying systems. "Transport signature detected," Data announced on the Enterprise. "Dr. Strange is—" A Romulan transporter beam lanced through the chaos, locking onto Strange's energy signature. "Belay that," Worf roared, his hands flying across controls. "Initiating Federation transporter. Compensating for interference." The Cardassians fired their own transporter beam. 3 separate transporter technologies converged on Strange simultaneously. Federation, Romulan, Cardassian, each trying to claim him before the others could succeed. The competing beams created a quantum probability nightmare, Strange's molecules existing in 3 different transporter patterns at once. Then Gowron's voice cut through the chaos with commanding authority. "Enough!" The Klingon cruiser fired, not at Strange, but at empty space between the vessels. The disruptor blast created an interference wave that disrupted all 3 transporter beams simultaneously, causing them to collapse. Strange rematerialized in open space, floating between the warring factions like the prize in some cosmic game. The cloak kept him aloft, but he was unconscious, blood trickling from his nose and ears from the neural trauma. Behind him, the Borg cube was dying. Dimensional fractures spread across its surface, each crack glowing with mystical energy. Drones stumbled through corridors as their collective link stuttered and failed. The Queen's consciousness fragmented, unable to process the corruption spreading through her systems. "All vessels, weapons hot," Worf reported grimly. "The Romulans and Cardassians are preparing to fight over a man who just saved all of them," Picard interrupted, his voice carrying the moral authority of someone who'd faced down gods and won through principle alone. "Mr. Worf, open a channel to all ships. It's time these empires remembered what's actually at stake." But before Picard could speak, Chancellor Gowron's ship moved. The Klingon cruiser accelerated, positioning itself directly between Strange and the Romulan warbirds. "The stranger is under Klingon protection," Gowron announced, his voice brooking no argument. "He has demonstrated honor through combat against impossible odds. Any who wish to capture him must first defeat me. I await your challenge." The declaration hung in space like a thrown gauntlet, and in the silence that followed, Strange began to fall toward the nearest gravity well, unconscious, vulnerable, and about to become the spark that ignited an interstellar incident. The standoff lasted precisely 4 seconds before the Romulan commander made her move. "Chancellor Gowron, your sense of honor is admirable but irrelevant," she said with clinical precision. "Deploy tractor beam. Bring the stranger aboard our vessel." Emerald light lanced from the warbird, reaching for Strange's floating form. But Goran's response was immediate and explosive. Disruptor fire streaked across the void, intercepting the tractor beam and overloading it in a cascade of sparks. The Romulan ship's shields flared as the energy feedback rocked its systems. "You were warned," Gowron growled. The Cardassian vessels opened fire on the Klingon cruiser. Phaser banks lit up space with deadly precision. But Gowron's crew had been anticipating this. The attack cruiser rolled, presenting its heavily armored dorsal surface. The shots impacted harmlessly, and return fire from the Klingon vessel struck one of the Cardassian ships directly on its command module. All ships. "Cease fire!" Picard's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone who'd prevented more wars than most admirals. "This is madness. The Borg cube is still operational. We should be—" As if in response, the dying Borg cube fired. Cutting beams lashed out in all directions, not with the collective's usual precision, but with the random fury of a wounded animal. One beam sliced across a Romulan warbird's nacelle, shearing through the hull and venting atmosphere. Another grazed the Enterprise's shields, forcing Picard to grip his command chair as the ship bucked. "Borg cube destabilizing," Data reported. "Cascading systems failures. Estimate complete structural collapse in 93 seconds. And still, Strange floated unconscious in the void, drifting slowly toward the planet below. A Federation colony world with 3 million inhabitants who had no idea they'd become the stage for an interstellar crisis. Worf's tactical board showed the impossible complexity of the situation. 5 major vessels in close proximity, weapons hot, shields raised, all converging on a single individual. One wrong move would trigger a battle that could reignite conflicts that had taken decades to cool. "Captain," Counselor Troy said quietly, her empathic senses overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions radiating from every ship. "I sense fear. From all of them. They're not just fighting over Dr. Strange. They're terrified of what the Borg almost became." Picard understood immediately. The Borg with magic would have been unstoppable. Every faction present had just witnessed how close they'd come to annihilation. Now they were scrambling to gain any advantage they could, driven by the primal need to ensure they'd never be that vulnerable again. "Mr. Data," Picard said calmly, "can our transporters reach Dr. Strange through the interference?" "Affirmative, but the Romulans and Cardassians have the same capability. It will be a race, Captain. Whoever establishes a lock first will—" "Then we'd better be first. Energize." The Enterprise's transporter chief initiated the sequence, but she wasn't alone. 3 other transporter systems activated simultaneously. Federation, Romulan, Cardassian, each one locked onto Strange's quantum signature, each one attempting to claim him. The competing beams created a phenomenon that shouldn't have been possible: quantum superposition on a macroscopic scale. Strange's unconscious form existed simultaneously in 4 different transporter buffers. His molecules spread across 4 different probability states. "Transport impossible," the Enterprise's transporter chief called out. "He's in quantum flux. If we don't resolve this, his pattern will collapse and he'll die," Data finished. "Dispersed across 4 separate transport streams, his molecular structure will destabilize in 17 seconds. On his flagship, Gowron slammed his fist against his command chair. "Petty fools! Your schemes will kill him!" He turned to his crew. "Release our transporter lock. Now!" "Chancellor?" his first officer questioned. "Now!" The Klingon transporter beam disengaged. 3 remained, still fighting for dominance, and Strange's quantum signature continued to destabilize. Picard made a decision that would either save a life or trigger an interstellar incident. "Release our transporter lock. Order from Starfleet Command. We do not compete with other powers for custody of sentient beings. Dr. Strange will choose his own fate, if he survives." The Federation beam released. That left 2, Romulan and Cardassian. each trying to pull Strange into their respective transporter buffers. His pattern stabilized slightly, but it wasn't enough. The competing technologies were still tearing him apart at the molecular level. The Romulan commander's face was stone. "We will not yield. The stranger represents too significant an advantage." The Cardassian ghoul's expression matched hers. "Agreed. We maintain our lock. Then you'll both have to explain how you let him die because neither would compromise," Picard stated flatly. "Is that really the legacy your empires want? Unable to save a man who just prevented the Borg from acquiring reality-warping power?" For 3 agonizing seconds, neither commander responded. Strange's quantum signature flickered on every sensor, growing weaker with each passing moment. Then the Cardassian ghoul spoke, his voice tight. "Release transporter lock. But this does not end here, Picard. The stranger will answer to the Union eventually." The Cardassian beam disengaged. The Romulan commander found herself alone, her transporter finally achieving a clean lock on Strange's pattern. She could complete the transport now, bring him aboard, secure the most valuable asset any empire could possess. But every ship in the sector would witness it. The Federation would know, the Klingons would know, the Cardassians would know. The act would expose Romulan ambitions in ways the Tal Shiar could never contain. "Damn you, Picard," she whispered. Then, louder, "Release the lock. But know this, Captain, the next time we meet, the circumstances will be very different." The Romulan beam disappeared. Strange's pattern solidified, no longer pulled in 4 directions. The cloak of levitation wrapped more tightly around him, beginning to guide his unconscious form toward the nearest stable location, the Enterprise. Reading his approach, data confirmed. The cloak appears to be operating independently, bringing him to us. Then, the Borg cube detonated. It wasn't a conventional explosion. The corrupted mystical energy Strange had introduced into the collective systems reached critical mass, and dimensional fractures consumed the cube from within. The massive structure folded in on itself, collapsing through layers of space that shouldn't exist. For a moment, it looked like the cube was being erased from reality itself. Then it was simply gone, leaving only debris and the echoes of a collective consciousness that had briefly glimpsed something beyond perfection and paid the price. The shockwave hit moments later. All 5 ships rocked as subspace ripples washed over them. The Enterprise's shields held, barely. On the bridge, sparks erupted from overloaded consoles. But the real concern was Strange, still floating in open space, caught directly in the expanding energy wave. The cloak blazed with light, forming a protective cocoon around its master. The shockwave struck, and for a terrifying moment, Strange's form was lost in the cascading energy. When the light cleared, he was still there, unconscious, battered, but alive. "Transporter room," Picard ordered. "Beam Dr. Strange directly to sickbay. Maximum confinement protocols until we understand his condition." "Aye, Captain." Golden light shimmered around Strange as the Enterprise's transporter finally claimed him. He materialized on a medical bed, Dr. Beverly Crusher's team immediately surrounding him with tricorders and medical scanners. Picard exhaled slowly, unaware he'd been holding his breath. Around the Enterprise, the other vessels began to withdraw. Romulans cloaking, Cardassians warping out, Goron's flagship holding position just long enough to transmit a single message. "You have earned honor today, Picard. The stranger lives because of your wisdom, but the Klingon Empire will remember this debt. Kapla." The Klingon cruiser warped away, leaving the Enterprise alone among the debris of a destroyed Borg cube and the fading energy signatures of a battle that had almost ignited. Picard sank into his command chair, suddenly exhausted. "Status of Dr. Strange?" he asked quietly. Dr. Crusher's voice came over the comm, professional but concerned. He's alive, but barely. Neural trauma, cellular damage, mystical energy depletion. Jean-Luc, whatever he did inside that cube almost killed him. I'm not even sure how to treat half of these injuries. His physiology is operating on principles our medical database doesn't cover. Do what you can, Doctor. We owe him that much. Picard stared at the view screen, watching the last debris from the Borg cube drift away into space. They'd averted catastrophe, barely. But new questions remained. What would happen when Strange woke up? Would the other powers return? And most importantly, could the dimensional breach he'd created be repaired? Or was this universe permanently connected to Strange's reality? The answers would have to wait. For now, they'd survived. Dr. Beverly Crusher had treated alien physiologies, exotic diseases, and injuries that defied conventional medicine. But nothing in her decades of experience had prepared her for Dr. Stephen Strange. His body existed in a state of quantum uncertainty that her medical scanners struggled to interpret. One moment, his neural pathways showed catastrophic damage. The next moment, they appeared to be regenerating through processes that had nothing to do with biology. Energy signatures flickered around his hands even while unconscious. Mystical force so deeply integrated into his cellular structure that it was impossible to distinguish where the man ended and the magic began. His brain activity is extraordinary, Crusher reported, studying the readings with fascination and concern. There are sections lighting up that we don't even have names for. It's like his mind operates in dimensions our scans can barely detect. Picard stood in sickbay, watching the unconscious sorcerer with the careful attention of someone who understood they were witnessing something historic. Will he recover? I honestly don't know. His body is trying to heal itself. But the damage from the neural interface goes deeper than tissue and synapses. Jean-Luc, I think when he connected to the Borg, he didn't just destroy their mystical data. He sacrificed parts of his own magical knowledge to do it. He's lost something fundamental. Before Picard could respond, Strange's eyes snapped open. They blazed with golden light, and every medical instrument in sickbay went haywire. Biobed displays shorted out. Scanners sparked. The containment field around Strange flickered and died as his unconscious mystical defenses rejected the technology. Dr. Strange, Picard said calmly, not moving despite the crackling energy filling the room. You're safe. You're aboard the Enterprise. The Borg cube has been destroyed. Strange sat up slowly, his head pounding with pain that transcended the physical. He could feel the gaps in his mind, spells he'd known for decades now gone, mystical techniques erased, dimensional knowledge corrupted during the feedback from the Borg connection. He'd won, but the price was a significant portion of his magical expertise. How long? Strange's voice was hoarse. 6 hours, Crusher replied, her medical instincts overriding her concern about the energy still crackling around him. You need to rest. Whatever you did in that cube nearly killed you. It should have killed me, Strange muttered, touching his temple and wincing. The cloak of levitation stirred around his shoulders, clearly relieved its master was conscious. The Borg's mystical data is destroyed? Our scans of the debris suggest complete obliteration. Data's voice came through the comm system. No intact data cores recovered. If the Borg Collective retained any mystical knowledge, it would have been stored in that cube. You succeeded, Dr. Strange. Strange nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through his skull. Good. That's good. He looked at Picard. The dimensional breach. The reason I ended up here in the first place. I need to... An explosion rocked the Enterprise. Red alert klaxons shrieked as the ship lurched violently. Picard grabbed a support beam while Crusher steadied herself against a medical console. Strange's hands moved instinctively, golden shields forming around himself and the medical staff before his conscious mind even registered the threat. Bridge to Captain. Worf's voice carried controlled urgency. "We're under attack. Multiple vessels decloaking. Identification." Section 31. Picard's expression hardened. "I'm on my way. Maintain shields. Evasive pattern beta." "Section 31?" Strange asked, sliding off the biobed despite Crusher's protests. "Let me guess. Your version of a secret intelligence agency that doesn't officially exist?" "Precisely," Picard replied grimly. "And if they're attacking openly, they want you badly enough to violate every Starfleet protocol. Doctor, I need you to stay in sickbay where it's—" Strange was already moving toward the door, the cloak billowing behind him. "Captain, with all due respect, I've just faced the Borg. I'm not hiding in your medical bay while Black Ops agents try to kidnap me. Besides," he gestured to the sparking medical equipment around them, "I think your doctor will be happier if I'm not in her sickbay when things get messy." Picard recognized the determination in Strange's eyes, the look of someone who'd made similar choices countless times before. He nodded curtly. "Come with me, but stay behind our security teams." They ran through corridors filled with emergency lighting, crew members rushing to battle stations. Another impact shook the Enterprise, and Strange's shields automatically extended to catch a falling support beam before it crushed an ensign. "Thanks," the young officer gasped. "Don't mention it," Strange replied, already moving forward. They reached the bridge to find organized chaos. The view screen showed 3 sleek vessels, not standard Starfleet designs, but something darker, more predatory. Section 31 ships. "Built for operations the Federation officially denied existed. Status," Picard commanded, settling into his command chair. 3 modified Defiant-class vessels, Worf reported. "Cloaking technology, enhanced weapons, reinforced shields. They're using Federation identification codes, but their behavior is hostile. They're attempting to disable our shields and transport aboard. Hail them." The view screen shifted to show a figure Strange recognized instantly, not from this universe, but from the archetype. The kind of person who believed the ends justified any means, who saw ethics as obstacles rather than guidelines. The Section 31 operative was human, middle-aged, with the cold eyes of someone who'd authorized atrocities in the name of security. "Captain Picard," the operative said without preamble, "you're harboring an extra-dimensional asset of incalculable strategic value. Section 31 is exercising Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha. Surrender Dr. Strange immediately, or we will take him by force." "Section 31 has no legal authority to—" "The law is irrelevant when the Federation's survival is at stake," the operative interrupted. "Dr. Strange represents power that could tip the balance against every threat we face. The Borg, the Dominion. The Borg with magical capabilities was nightmare enough. Imagine if our enemies acquired similar abilities while we chose to play by rules they don't respect." Strange stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd heard this argument before and rejected it every time. "I've met people like you in my universe. They always think they're protecting their world. They always believe the rules don't apply to them because the stakes are too high, and they always, without exception, become the very threat they claim to be fighting." "You don't understand our reality," the operative countered. "In this universe, idealism gets people killed. Pragmatism keeps civilizations alive. We need your abilities. We need to understand them, replicate them, weaponize them before our enemies do." "No," Strange said simply. "You really don't. Then you've made your choice." The Section 31 ships opened fire with everything they had. Unlike the earlier engagement with the Romulans and Cardassians, there was no posturing, no diplomatic maneuvering. These ships had been built for one purpose: to eliminate threats to Federation security by any means necessary. Quantum torpedoes slammed into the Enterprise's shields with devastating precision. These weren't standard Starfleet weapons. They'd been enhanced, modified, designed to overwhelm even Sovereign-class defenses. Shields at 73%, Data reported. They are targeting our shield generators with surgical precision. They're trying to create a gap for transport, Worf realized. Captain, if they breach our shields, they won't get the chance, Strange interrupted. His hands began moving through complex patterns, golden energy building between his fingers. Captain, I need you to drop your shields, just for 3 seconds. That's suicide, Worf objected. Trust me, Strange said, and there was something in his voice, absolute confidence born from battles across dimensions, that made Picard nod. Mr. Worf, drop shields on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. The Enterprise's shields vanished. Section 31 transporters locked on immediately, beams reaching for Strange's quantum signature. But Strange was ready. His hands swept outward, and the mirror dimension exploded into existence, not around himself, but around the 3 attacking ships. Reality fractured around them like shattered glass. The Section 31 vessels suddenly found themselves in a realm where their weapons fire curved back on itself, where their navigation systems reported impossible coordinates, where cause and effect became meaningless. What? The operative's face filled with shock. What have you done? Trapped you in a dimensional pocket, Strange replied, his voice strained from the effort. Even weakened, he had enough power for this. You'll remain there until I release you. No weapons, no communications, no escape. Just time to think about whether kidnapping extra-dimensional beings was really your best strategy. He closed his fist, and the mirror dimension sealed. The 3 ships vanished from normal space, trapped in a prison of recursive reality. The bridge crew stared in stunned silence. How long will they remain trapped? Picard asked quietly. As long as I want, Strange replied, then wavered on his feet. The spell had cost more than he'd anticipated. Or until I pass out, which might be soon. He collapsed. Data moved with android speed, catching Strange before he hit the deck. Sick bay, Picard ordered. And this time, Doctor, make sure he actually rests. 3 days later, Strange stood on the Enterprise's observation deck, staring at the stars through reinforced, transparent aluminum. His reflection in the glass showed a man who looked older than he had a week ago, lines deeper around his eyes, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The gaps in his mystical knowledge haunted him like phantom limbs. Spells he'd cast thousands of times now felt distant, their patterns eroded by the corruption he'd inflicted on himself to destroy the Borg's data. But he was alive. And more importantly, the multiverse was safe from Borg with magical capabilities. I thought I'd find you here. Picard's voice came from behind him. Strange didn't turn. Couldn't sleep. Your Dr. Crusher is remarkable, but she can't heal what I've lost. Some damage transcends medicine. Picard moved to stand beside him, his own reflection joining Strange's in the glass. We've analyzed the dimensional breach that brought you here. Commander Data and Lieutenant Commander LaForge have been working with what little mystical theory you've been able to share. The news isn't encouraging. Let me guess, Strange said quietly. The breach is destabilizing, creating more fractures between universes, and you don't have the technology to seal it. Correct. And according to our projections, you no longer have the mystical capability either, not with the knowledge you sacrificed to stop the Borg. Picard paused, choosing his words carefully. Dr. Strange, it appears you may be trapped in our universe permanently. Strange had known this was coming. He'd felt it the moment he'd awakened in sickbay. The connection to his own dimension stretched impossibly thin, fraying at the edges. The spell he'd used against the Borg had burned bridges he might never rebuild. Wong is going to kill me, Strange muttered, a ghost of humor in his voice. He's probably dealing with dimensional incursions without me. The sanctums are vulnerable, and I'm here, billions of light years and one universe away, completely unable to help." "I'm sorry," Picard said, and meant it genuinely. "But perhaps there's another way forward. Starfleet has been intensely interested in your situation. Multiple Admiralty-level discussions. The Federation Science Council wants to study the dimensional mechanics. Several universities have requested access to your mystical knowledge for research purposes." Strange's expression hardened. "Like Section 31 wanted access?" "Nothing like Section 31," Picard assured him firmly. "Their ships remain in your dimensional prison, and I've filed formal protests that will keep that particular organization occupied with hearings for years. What I'm proposing is genuine collaboration, not exploitation. Partnership." Strange finally turned to face the captain. "What kind of partnership?" "The Federation faces threats you've proven capable of addressing. The Borg will return. They always do. The Dominion continues to expand. Q appears periodically to test our worthiness, and now we know that dimensional barriers can be breached, which means other extra-dimensional threats might follow you here." Picard met Strange's eyes steadily. "We need someone who understands realities beyond our science. In return, we offer you resources to potentially rebuild your mystical knowledge, or at minimum, find a way to communicate with your universe. You want me to become Starfleet's mystical consultant?" "I want you to have purpose while you're trapped here," Picard corrected. "You're a man who's dedicated his life to protecting his reality. I'm offering you the chance to protect this one as well." Strange considered this carefully. He was Sorcerer Supreme, or had been. His duty was to Earth, to his dimension, to the reality he'd sworn to defend. But that reality was unreachable now, possibly forever. And this universe, with its own dangers and complexities, was equally deserving of protection. "There's another problem," Strange said. "The dimensional fractures I created aren't just between our universes. They've weakened the barriers across multiple realities. Other things might slip through. Demon entities, or worse, other people like me from different dimensions who might not be as interested in cooperation." "Then we'll face them together," Picard replied. "The Federation has dealt with the impossible before. We'll adapt." Before Strange could respond, the comm system chimed. "Bridge to Captain Picard. We're receiving a priority transmission from Starfleet Command. Admiral Nechayev wants to speak with you and Dr. Strange immediately." Picard and Strange exchanged glances. "On our way," Picard responded. Minutes later, they stood on the bridge as Admiral Nechayev's stern face filled the view screen. She was a woman who'd built her career on making hard decisions and accepting their consequences. "Captain Picard, Dr. Strange," she began without preamble. "The Federation Council has reviewed your reports. The existence of functional magic and accessible alternate dimensions represents a paradigm shift in our understanding of reality. We're establishing a new Starfleet division, Dimensional and Extra-Normal Phenomena Research. You, Dr. Strange, are being offered the position of Chief Consultant, with full civilian authority and Starfleet resources at your disposal." Strange raised an eyebrow. That was fast. "The Borg incident made the necessity abundantly clear," Nechayev replied. "We need expertise in areas our science has never addressed. You possess that expertise. In addition, we're assigning the Enterprise as the primary vessel for dimensional-related missions. Captain Picard will command, with you as special advisor." Picard looked surprised. "Admiral, the Enterprise was scheduled for patrol duties in—" "Plans change, Captain. The dimensional fractures Dr. Strange created are already showing effects. We've detected spatial anomalies in 3 sectors, unknown vessels of possibly extra-dimensional origin, and disturbing reports from Deep Space Nine about entities that phase between realities." Nechayev's expression remained granite hard. Someone needs to address these threats before they escalate. You two have already proven you can work together effectively. Strange felt the weight of new responsibilities settling on his shoulders. It was familiar, actually, just redirected toward a different universe. I accept, Admiral, but I have conditions. First, I continue searching for a way home. Any resources you provide include support for that research. Second, I'm not a weapon to be deployed. I'll help, advise, and fight when necessary. But I won't become Starfleet's magical enforcer. Third, if I discover a way to repair the dimensional barriers, I'm taking it, even if that means losing my ability to protect your universe. Acceptable, Nechayev said without hesitation. Your integrity is precisely why we want you in this role, Dr. Strange. Welcome to Starfleet, civilian consultant. The transmission ended. Strange looked at Picard, who seemed caught between satisfaction at keeping his ship on interesting missions and concern about the implications. Well, Captain, looks like we're partners now. Indeed, Picard replied, allowing a small smile. Though I suspect working with you will make encounters with Q seem straightforward by comparison. Probably, Strange admitted. The cloak of levitation stirred around his shoulders, as if settling in for a long assignment. But I've learned something important over the past few days, Captain. Magic and science aren't as different as they appear. Both are ways of understanding reality. Both can be used to protect or destroy. And both require people willing to make difficult choices when the stakes are absolute. Then we're well matched, Picard said. Because the Enterprise has always specialized in difficult choices. Data turned from his console. Captain, we're receiving distress calls from Starbase 157. They're reporting spatial tears and energy signatures consistent with Dr. Strange's mystical readings. Something is coming through. Picard settled into his command chair, the familiar weight of command reasserting itself. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Helm, set course for Starbase 157, maximum warp. Strange's hands began to glow with golden light, mystical energy responding despite his diminished capacity. He was weaker than before, but far from helpless. Captain, one more thing you should know about dimensional breaches. What's that? They never come alone. If something's crossing over at Starbase 157, there will be more. This is just the beginning. The Enterprise leapt to warp, racing toward the first of what would be many dimensional crises. Behind them, the stars wheeled silently, and across the thin barrier between realities, tiers continued to form. Each one a doorway, each one a threat, each one a new challenge for the strangest partnership Starfleet had ever forged. Dr. Stephen Strange, former Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, was about to become the Federation's first line of defense against the impossible. And in a universe built on exploration and discovery, he'd finally found a new purpose. The dimensional breach that brought Dr. Stephen Strange to the Star Trek universe was never fully sealed. Instead, it became a permanent scar across the multiverse, a thin membrane between realities that would require constant vigilance to prevent catastrophic collapse. In the months that followed, Strange established himself as an invaluable asset to the Federation. Working from a laboratory aboard Deep Space Nine, chosen for its proximity to the wormhole and experience with spatial phenomena, he began the painstaking work of cataloging dimensional threats while simultaneously researching methods to restore his connection to his home universe. His partnership with Starfleet proved more complex than either side anticipated. Strange's mystical approach to problems often clashed with Federation scientific methodology, yet these conflicts produced breakthroughs neither could have achieved alone. Data became his most frequent collaborator, the android's computational precision complementing Strange's intuitive grasp of mystical principles. Together, they developed hybrid technologies that merged magic and science, dimensional sensors that could detect reality breaches, shield modifications that incorporated mystical barriers, and theoretical frameworks for understanding how multiple universes could coexist without destroying each other. The Borg Collective, meanwhile, suffered losses from which it would take years to recover. The destruction of their mystical research cube sent ripples through the collective consciousness, a rare moment of uncertainty in their otherwise perfect unity. They learned, for the first time in their existence, that some forms of power resisted assimilation. This knowledge made them more cautious, but also more determined. Somewhere in the dark reaches of space, the collective continued to analyze what little data they'd retained about Dr. Strange, planning for an inevitable rematch. The political ramifications of Strange's arrival echoed across the Alpha Quadrant. The Romulan Star Empire, Cardassian Union, and Klingon Empire all adjusted their strategic assessments to account for the Federation's new mystical consultant. Some saw opportunity. Chancellor Gowron, in particular, developed an unexpected friendship with Strange, the Klingon warrior respecting anyone who'd face the Borg alone inside their own cube. Others saw a threat. Romulan intelligence continued plotting ways to acquire Strange's knowledge, while Cardassian military theorists worked on countermeasures against dimensional manipulation. Section 31 remained imprisoned in the mirror dimension for exactly 30 days before Strange released them, long enough to make his point clear. When they emerged, the organization found itself under unprecedented scrutiny from Starfleet Command, their illegal activities exposed by Picard's formal protests. Though they continued to operate in the shadows, they learned to approach Dr. Strange with considerably more respect. But Strange's greatest challenge wasn't external threats. It was internal. The mystical knowledge he'd sacrificed to stop the Borg left wounds that refused to heal. Spells that once came automatically now required conscious effort. Dimensional navigation that had been instinctive became laborious calculation. He was still formidable, still dangerous, but diminished in ways that haunted him during quiet moments. Yet he adapted. Drawing on Federation resources and his own relentless determination, Strange began rebuilding his mystical expertise from first principles. He trained himself to work within his new limitations, developing techniques that merged what remained of his magical knowledge with Star Trek's technological sophistication. In time, he became something neither universe had seen before, a true fusion of magic and science, operating at the intersection of two fundamentally different approaches to reality. As for returning home, Strange never abandoned hope. Deep in his laboratory, surrounded by dimensional equations and mystical diagrams, he continued searching for a pathway back to his universe. Some nights, he succeeded in establishing brief connections, fleeting moments where he could sense Earth across the dimensional gulf, feel the Sanctum's presence, know that his world continued without him. Wong felt these connections too. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, the acting Sorcerer Supreme maintained Earth's defenses while refusing to give up on his friend. And across the infinite expanse of the multiverse, two realities remained linked by the thinnest of threads, a connection born from crisis, maintained through determination, and destined to shape the future of both universes in ways neither could fully anticipate. Dr. Stephen Strange had saved the Star Trek universe from magical catastrophe. In return, it gave him a new purpose, new allies, and new challenges worthy of a Sorcerer Supreme. The multiverse would never be quite the same. New worlds await. More stories soon.